Uh, all right. So yeah, we starting off with the Marxist perspective on family, and as we refer to this Marxist perspective on family, we all know that this Marxist perspective more or less would revolve around how capitalism plays its role in terms of bringing in inequality in the society, how capitalism would rather affect families overall. So let me remind you all, when you talk about Marxist, this Marxist perspective, Marxism as well as functionalism, they're both structuralist perspective, right? Both Marxist and structuralist, they are, both Marxist and functionalist, they're structuralist perspective. So the general or the typical idea over here is that it is the structures of society. It's the structures of society. These structures end up shaping or manipulating whatever happens in the society. And likewise, right now, the structure that we're referring to right now, the structure that we'll be dealing with is family as an institution, family as a structure. So moving on, Marxism and functionalism are both examples of structuralist theories, and they're mainly interested in how the family, that is macro theories, contribute to the overall running of society rather than how people experience family life on a daily basis. Now, if we would have spoken about how people experience family life on a daily basis, that would have been an example of the interactionist perspective, right? Because remember, my dear, interactionists focus more on micro theories, whereas structuralists, they focus more on macro theories. The like functionalists, then Marxists, are keen to find out what the overall purpose of or the function of the family is for the society. Now, taking this a step ahead, since we're discussing Marxism, a quick little idea over here about what Marxism is. Now, when you talk about Marxism, Marxist Karl Marx was born in 1818, he died in 1883. According to Karl Marx, the problems that we have in society, they're all because of inequality of wealth, and this inequality of wealth eventually benefits the capitalist system. It eventually benefits the bourgeois, the rich, the powerful, the elite, at the expense of the poor, the powerless, and the proletariats. Now, taking it ahead, according to Marxists reject the functionist view that the society is based on value consensus. Now, see, it's pretty essential for us all to realize, for us all to keep this in mind, that Marxism is a conflict-based theory. However, when you talk about functionalism, functionalism is a consensus-based theory. So Marxists do not at all agree to the idea that family as an institution works towards bringing in value consensus that benefits the society overall. If anything, now what I'd say from now onwards is pretty important. If anything, according to the Marxist perspective, this family as an institution, it works, it operates towards benefiting the capitalist system. It operates towards benefiting the rich, the elite, right? Now, how is it that a family, now just think थोड़ी देर के लिए सोचें कि आपकी family, how do you think your family can play its role in terms of benefiting the capitalist system, right? Family तो हमें अपनी अपनी family लगती है ना, मतलब family से ज्यादा हमारे साथ हमारा और कौन close होगा? And family is family, there's nothing like a family. But the question that rises over here is, if Marxists claim that family as an institution, right, intentionally or unintentionally, if it's working towards, it's somehow or the other working towards benefiting the capitalist system, it just makes this capitalist system stronger, right? How does this happen? Now, a couple of examples first. I'll just give you a couple of examples, and then we'd be in a better position to take this ahead. You know what? If we talk about a family, what are the few things that you should have in mind before we even get started with this? You do realize, for the capitalist system to work in a manner that it benefits the rich and elite, you ought to have constant reproduction of labor force. आपके पास लेबर फोर्स का होना बहुत ज्यादा जरूरी है, और इस लेबर फोर्स का आपके पास इसकी कांस्टेंट रिप्रोडक्शन बहुत ज्यादा जरूरी है. You know, it's the proletariat's family. Remember, proletariat, P for proletariat, P for poor, P for powerless, right? These proletariats, according to the Marxist perspective, it's these proletariats, it's their families who reproduce, and their children eventually are potential labor force for the newer generation, ताकि आपका system चलता रहे. देखें, bourgeoisie फैक्ट्रीज लगाते हैं, फैक्ट्रीज में खुद तो काम नहीं करते हैं ना, उनको फैक्ट्रीज में काम करने के लिए लेबर फोर्स चाहिए, और ये कांस्टेंट रिप्रोडक्शन ऑफ लेबर फोर्स, let me repeat, constant reproduction of labor force, ये labor force आपको कहां से आ रही है? ये proletariats की फैमिली से आ रही है, right? Nowhere did I say कि गरीब का बच्चा आगे चल के फैक्ट्री में ही काम करेगा, but then the likelihood, the chances of a proletariat's child working working as a proletariat are more as compared to a bourgeois child experiencing downward social mobility and working in a factory as a worker or a member of the labor force. तो पहला example, the example that I was giving you, अगर proletariats की family नहीं होती, so don't you think it would have been difficult for the bourgeoisies because उनके पास ये constant reproduction of labor नहीं होती? One. Number two, it's these proletariats, they're more or less a unit of consumption. I mean, everyone is, all of us consume, but then remember, the rich, the bourgeois, they're a tiny minority. The poor, the proletariats, they're quite a big majority, right? So agar hum baat karte hain about these proletariats, ye proletariats, they could be your potential consumers. The products that are produced, the products that are manufactured in the factories that are owned by the rich, the elite, eventually you need to have consumers for them. ये consumers आपके proletariats हो सकते हैं. Number two, तो again आपने, I mean, again now you see how you having consumers. See, if you're running a business, the more consumers you have, the better it is for you. Number two. Number three, a proletariat, right? Or someone who is working, right? A proletariat or someone who's working in a factory or any other business who does not own his or her own business. These proletariats, they lose their bargaining power. If I talk about a male member of a proletariat family, they lose their bargaining power once they start working, right? Once they have a family. You know what? A family man would be more careful when he goes to work, because deep down inside, he knows for a fact that he would not want to get fired. Deep down inside, he knows for a fact that the more submissive, obedient, docile, workaholic he is, the better it works for him, the more chances there are that his continuous जो उसको monthly income होती है वो उसको मिलती रहेगी, right? A married man, a family man, what I'm saying is he loses his bargaining power. If your boss calls you stupid, you just say sorry to him, because you know you have a lot of mouths to feed back at home. You cannot argue with your boss. There are more chances of you being docile, you being workaholic, you being obedient, right? Now, taking this a step ahead. Now, these are just 3 examples that I've given over here. There are more, there are numerous examples. Now, the way your family socializes you. If we talk about this socialization process, I mean, a part of the socialization process has to do with obedience. Individuals at a very young age, they taught how to be obedient. They're taught how to not question authority. Don't you think when these individuals, as they grow up, इनका rebelliousness तो बचपन में ही मार दिया गया है. Now, these individuals, as they grow up, don't you think there are more chances of them being the very sharif members of workforce who would never stand up against the system regardless of what you make them go through, right? Now, there are a lot more examples that we could bring them over here, and quite a lot of them we'd be discussing them a bit ahead as well. But taking this a step ahead, as I move on, a quick little recap. According to the Marxist perspective, even family as an institution operates or works in a manner that it helps the rich and the powerful. Family as an institution makes the capitalist system stable and stronger, which eventually benefits the bourgeois. Now, as we take this Marxist perspective ahead, there are two two sociologists that I'd want to discuss over here. I'd like to start off with Friedrich Engels, and number two, we'd speak about Elie Zaretsky, right? Friedrich Engels and Elie Zaretsky, these are the two sociologists that I'd want to take a start with over here. Now, when we talk about फ्रीडरिक एंगल्स, एंगल्स साहब कौन है जनाब? फ्रीडरिक एंगल्स की बात करते हैं तो you may refer to him as I mean he was a friend of Karl Marx. Just give me a minute, I just pause this. And yeah, we were talking about Friedrich Engels, and when we talk about Friedrich Engels, he was a friend of Karl Marx. Friedrich Engels, they say he was the one who helped Karl Marx a lot. He even helped Karl Marx financially, right? He helped Karl Marx financially towards the end of Karl Marx's life, right? Because Karl Marx wasn't really financially very stable, and because of which he had to be helped financially, and the person who helped him was Friedrich Engels. One more thing, when Karl Marx died, the books he was writing, the ones that weren't finished, right, they were later on finished by Friedrich Engels. So yeah, they had this close bond, and of course, Friedrich Engels is a Marxist. I don't think I need to explain that. Now, according to Engels, let me explain this to you. According to Engels, this entire idea of family emerged to facilitate the rich, right? एंगल्स, फ्रीडरिक एंगल्स, आप कहते हैं कि आपके पास फैमिली का कॉन्सेप्ट आया ही तब था जब आपको फैसिलिटेट करना था rich को, the rich, the elite, the elite people, they had to be facilitated because of which आपके पास फैमिली का कॉन्सेप्ट शुरू हुआ. Now, if we talk about our society, अगर हम सोसाइटी की बात करते हैं तो हमारे पास सोसाइटी के अंदर, our society has evolved. We had the hunter gatherer groups, hunter gatherer groups. Wait, is that even gatherer? That doesn't even look like hunter. So yeah, we had hunter gatherer groups, followed by pastoral societies, followed by agrarian societies, followed by cottage industries, followed by industrialization के साथ साथ आपके पास modernization आई, जिसके बाद आपके पास this say आज post modernity है, ठीक है? तो what I'm trying to explain you all over here is that our society, my dear, has been evolving. आपकी society के अंदर changes आती जा रही है, right? Now, if we talk about these hunter gatherer groups, right, these are the people who used to hunt, gather, and eat, right? Of course, if you're talking about people who used to hunt, gather, and eat, that in other words means they did not have any extra wealth. They did not have any wealth accumulated. They did not have any wealth accumulated, right? According to Engels, slowly and gradually, when societies started evolving and society के अंदर आपके पास अमीर लोग, गरीब लोग, ये सारा concept आना शुरू हो गया. So this is when the rich felt like they had to make their wealth secure, right? When the rich felt like they had to make their wealth secured, that in other words means they had to come up with some mechanism or the other to ensure that after their death, right, to ensure that after their death, their wealth is transferred or it is inherited by the rightful successor. Right now, according to Engels, now this is one more important thing that everyone has to keep in mind. According to Friedrich Engels, if we talk about this era, if we're talking about this era, he refers to this as, he uses the word promiscuous herds for this, right? According to him, there was a time when individuals used to live like animals, right? There was no rule, no law, there was no restriction on the sexual behavior of individuals, right? Now, when we're talking about there being no restriction on the sexual behavior of individuals, that in other words means one cannot be sure about, right? One cannot be sure about the paternity of a child, right? And according to Engels, it worked best in the interest of the bourgeois. It worked best in the interest of the bourgeois that there were some rules or regulations, some laws passed that restricted the sexual behavior of females, because of which aapke paas one could be sure about the paternity of a child, right? Now, one has to be sure about the paternity of the child to be able to figure out, to be able to know कि आपका जो वेल्थ है आपके मरने के बाद वो कौन सक्सीड, वो कौन इनहेरिट करेगा. Do we get this? I hope we do. Yeah. Now moving
Yes, sir.
on. Thank you. Now, Friedrich Engels, Friedrich Engels, the family, the bourgeois, and the private property. Engels speculated that the history of humanity could be divided into two main eras. Number one, the era of primitive communism. Number two, the era of capitalism. Now, when we talk about this era of primitive communism, right, when we talk about this era of primitive communism, Engels claimed that during the early stage of human evolution, there was no private property, and the family as we know it today did not exist, right? Human beings lived in promiscuous herds of tribes. There were very few rules limiting sexual relationships, and marriage we know today also did not exist. Children were brought up by the whole tribe rather than the parents. Now, again, this is something that has been put forward by Friedrich Engels. This is the perspective. This could be right, this could be wrong. There's a possibility इसको support करने वाले जितने लोग आपको मिले उतने ही लोग इसके खिलाफ बात करने वाले आपको मिले, right? Of course, this has faced a lot of this entire idea has been questioned and criticized as well. Now, let me repeat. According to Friedrich Engels, Engels is a Marxist, right? According to Friedrich Engels, we can divide human era into two main parts. The first one is the era of primitive communism. The second one is the era of capitalism, right? Now, primitive communism kya hai? Iska maine aapko idea de diya. Number two, when you talk about the era of capitalism, like I said, there had to be rules passed, right? You had to come up with laws. For instance, there was a time for a very long time, monogamous marriages. Remember, my kids, when you talk about monogamous marriages or monogamy is when you're married to one person, one partner, a heterosexual partner throughout your life, right? If you married to one heterosexual partner throughout your life, heterosexual, in other words, an individual from an opposite sex, right? If you're married to one heterosexual partner throughout your life, that automatically means you would be sure about who your children are. You'd be sure that tomorrow when you die, your wealth is passed on to your rightful successor. It is inherited by your rightful successor. Moving on, the era of capitalism. Engels claimed that the nuclear family based on monogamy, that is marriage between one man and one woman, only developed with the emergence of capitalism, which led to the accumulation of private property and wealth. Now, accumulation of private property and wealth, we're talking about this capitalist era. We're talking about capitalism, right? Now, when we talk about capitalism, remember the idea is there would be no restrictions by the state and the rich would keep on getting richer, right? When the rich keep on getting richer, that in other words means they have a lot of wealth accumulated. And when they have a lot of wealth accumulated, this accumulation of wealth by the rich has to be inherited by their kids. And for this, there had to be a mechanism that had to be developed, and that was marriage, being specific, monogamous marriages. Monogamous marriages when you marry or when you live with the same partner throughout your life. Taking it ahead, the era of capitalism. Engels claimed that the nuclear family based on monogamy, that is marriage between one man and one woman, only developed with the emergence of capitalism, which led to the accumulation of private property and wealth. Engels claimed that monogamous nuclear family was adopted by the capitalists because it provided the most effective way of ensuring that wealth and private property was inherited by a person's direct descendant. That's exactly what I've been saying all along. If there's only one husband and one wife in a family, questions about the paternity of children or about which wife's children should inherit were unlikely to arise. Engels claimed that monogamous marriages in particular was useful to the capitalist class, right? Do you see how this entire idea of monogamous marriages is benefiting the capitalist class? It's benefiting the capitalist system. It's benefiting the rich. It's benefiting the elite. Get it? Moving on. In particular, was useful for the capitalist class because it conferred legitimacy of children, and therefore members of the bourgeoisie were able to ensure that their fortunes were inherited by their direct descendants. Now, taking it ahead, or rather, before I proceed with this, I want you all to give this a look as well. See, the origins of the family, Private property and the state. Engels attempted to trace the origins of family and evolution through time. The mode of production changed, so did the family, from promiscuous herds to monogamous marriages. During the early stage of human evolution, means of production were communally owned and the family as such did not exist. There were no rules limiting sexual relationship. Moving on, if we talk about the evolution of family according to Friedrich Engels, throughout history, more restrictions have been placed on sexual relationships and the production of children. The monogamous nuclear family developed with the emergence of private property, in particular the private ownership of the means of production. The state instituted laws to protect the system of private property and to enforce the rules of monogamous marriages. There was a need of greater control over women so that there would be no doubt about the paternity of the offspring. This is all we have been discussing all along. Now, I'm assuming we all have an idea about Friedrich Engels taking this a step ahead. Let's move on and try to evaluate. Let's try to evaluate Engels. Now, let me remind you all, a couple of minutes back, what I had said was, when you talk about Friedrich Engels, Engels is a Marxist and Marxism is a perspective. When we talk about a perspective could be right and a perspective could be wrong as well. Taking a step ahead, if we're evaluating Engels over here, you know what? There's evidence available that supports Engels' claims, right? When we talk about there being evidence available that supports Engels' claims, we have a study by this social anthropologist Kathleen Go as well that we'll be discussing in a couple of minutes, right? तो जब हम evaluate करते हैं Engels के claims को, तो number one, what has to be kept in mind is we do have evidence that shows that capitalism की emergence की वजह से nuclear families increase हुई थी. पहली बात, ठीक है? Nuclear family, a family that has a husband, wife and few children through a monogamous marriage, right? Whereas at the same time, there's even evidence that shows us that these nuclear families existed pre-capitalism too. Like I said, it's a perspective, right? It could work for you, it could not work for you. Clear? It could be right, it could be wrong. It could be partially right, it could be partially wrong. Get it? Now, as soon as we're done with this, I'll show you guys a question from your past papers on the Marxist perspective. So if we move on and evaluate Engels, there's strong evidence that suggests that monogamous nuclear families have grown in popularity as capitalism has evolved, like I said. Although there's also evidence that nuclear families existed in large numbers pre-capitalism too. So there's evidence in support of it and there's evidence against it as well. Number two, feminists point out that there's no historical evidence of an era of primitive communism. This is pure speculation. Ouch. Now, according to feminists, this is nothing more than pure speculation. It's something Friedrich Engels has been speculating and he does not have any empirical evidence to support his claims. Again, this is a criticism. This is a question that has been raised. This is a flaw that has been detected when it comes to Engels' claims. Number three, however, this social anthropologist, Kathleen Go, we're talking about this social anthropologist, Kathleen Go. She was a British anthropologist who was known for her work in South Asia and Southeast Asia. This social anthropologist, Kathleen the social anthropologist, Kathleen Go claims that she did come across evidence that supports the claims that were made by Friedrich Engels. Clear, dear? So this is what I'm talking about. However, anthropologists, people who study primitive tribal societies such as Kathleen Go, have supported Engels' idea that primitive human societies were characterized by promiscuous sexual relationships because our nearest relatives, that is chimpanzees, live in promiscuous groups. I hope this helps. Moving on, let's talk about evidence that supports Friedrich Engels. See, we're evaluating Engels, right? When we're evaluating Engels, so there is evidence that supports Engels' claims and there's evidence that would go against his claims as well. So moving on, Morgan was a pioneering American anthropologist and social theorist and one of the greatest social scientists of the 19th century in the United States. He's best known for his work on kinship and social structure, his theories of social evolution. Now, Engels, Morgan, let's have a look at what Morgan has to say about Engels. American anthropologist Morgan's research suggested that monogamous marriages and the nuclear family are often found in hunting and gathering bands. There you go. Number two, Kathleen Go in support of Engels. Kathleen Go in 1972 supports the general trend of Engels' argument. Although nuclear family and monogamous marriages exist in small-scale families, they form a part of a larger kinship group. When individuals marry, they take on a series of duties and obligations to their partner's kin. Communities are united by kinship ties, and the result is a large extended family, right? So summing it up, we had started off with the Marxist perspective. While discussing the Marxist perspective, initially I tried to give you all an idea about the basics. We went on and we further spoke about Friedrich Engels. Next in line, we have Mr. Eli Zaretsky. But before we start off with Mr. Eli Zaretsky, this is a gentleman, Eli Zaretsky. He's a Marxist. Before we start off with Eli Zaretsky, I'd want to give you all a 2-minute break, and then we proceed. I want to rather give myself a 2-minute break as well. Starting off with Friedrich Engels. No, we're done with Friedrich Engels. We're starting off with Eli Zaretsky. Now let's have a look at what Mr. Zaretsky has to say about the role a family plays and how Zaretsky thinks the role that is played by a family helps or benefits the capitalist system, right? How is it that the role that is played by the family helps or benefits the capitalist system? Now, according to Eli Zaretsky, the family is an ideological agency, right? The family is an ideological agency. Why is it that we're using the word an ideological agency, or what does the word ideological agency actually mean? Now, when you talk about an ideological agency or family, in other words, is an institution that would change the ideology of an individual. Okay? अब ideology है क्या? Ideology in this context, the set of ideas that anyone carries, right? अब families ऐसा क्या रोल प्ले करती हैं जिससे एक इंडिविजुअल का सेट ऑफ आइडियाज, इंडिविजुअल्स की सोच, एक इंडिविजुअल्स की आइडियोलॉजी चेंज हो जाए, right? Now, Eli Zaretsky in 1976, like most other Marxists, claimed that modern nuclear family is an ideological agency which operates as a part of the superstructure of capitalist society to reproduce and legitimate the inequality and exploitation found in the economic infrastructure. Now, what does a family actually do जिससे आपकी फैमिली लेजिटिमाइज करती है इकोनॉमिक एक्सप्लॉइटेशन, जिससे आपकी फैमिली लेजिटिमाइज कर रही होती है सोसाइटल इनइक्वालिटी? अब सोसाइटल इनइक्वालिटी को लेजिटिमाइज करना, इकोनॉमिक एक्सप्लॉइटेशन को लेजिटिमाइज करना, व्हाट डज दैट मीन? जब हम बात करते हैं अबाउट द legitimization of social inequality, देखें, from a very young age, young children have been told by their families. I mean, there are many families do that. I mean, they keep on, they explain a child कि सोसाइटी के अंदर अलग अलग स्ट्रैटास हैं, सोसाइटी के अंदर अलग अलग डिविजन्स हैं. आप अपने बच्चे को सिखाते हो, लिसन बेटा, if we stand here, there are people who are not as rich as we are, there are people who are not as rich as they are, and at the same time, if we standing away, there are people who are richer than us, and then there are people who are even richer than the ones who are richer than us, right? So the idea over here is, according to the Marxist Eli Zaretsky, at this point, we're talking about a family being an ideological agency जो legitimize कर रही होती है social inequality को. देखें, हमें society के अंदर हम बच्चों को सिखा रहे होते हैं कि हमारे पास society के अंदर inequality है. Inequality in the sense, हम ऐसे नहीं कहते कि inequality है, but inequality in the sense that, okay, if we have this much, there are people who have a lot more than we do, and it is totally okay, right? It is totally okay. This has explained to kids at times directly or indirectly. Clear? And legitimizing economic exploitation. I mean, there are many subtle ways through which all of this happens. For instance, from a very young age, you keep on telling kids that they need to work hard. Kids are told time and again that they need to work hard, put in efforts, they need to struggle to do better, right? There are so many families that from a very young age, again, keep on telling the kids that they need to put in efforts, work hard, so that they could get a good job. Remember, when we're talking about someone getting a good job, you're actually working for someone else. You're putting in efforts so that you could help someone else get richer, right? So Eli Zaretsky, moving on. Consequently, nuclear family life mainly benefits capitalism and the capitalist class at the expense of other members of society. This can be illustrated in four key ways. Number one, Zaretsky saw the family as a crucial agent of socialization. Like I said, your family is the agency that socializes you from a very young age, right? Your family, like you keep on saying, gives you an identity, tells you who you are, what the color of your skin is, what the do's are, what the don'ts are, what to support, what not to support. So probably through this socialization process, right? It's through this socialization process that the family socializes children into a capitalist ideology, right? Into a capitalist ideology, beta, or in other words, into an ideology that directly or indirectly supports the capitalist system, benefits the capitalist system, facilitates the capitalist system, right? However, Zaretsky believed that the family socialized children into capitalist ideology in order to turn them into passive and falsely conscious workers, right? Children at a young age, like I said earlier, उनका stubbornness खत्म किया जा रहा होता है. बच्चों का from a very young age, they are disciplined. They disciplined, and this idea or this act of getting kids disciplined at a very young age, making a point that they're not stubborn. How does this benefit the capitalist system? उनके अंदर जो revolutionary या उनके अंदर जो revolt करने वाली या rebel करने वाली qualities होती है, उनको आप at a very young age you keep on suppressing them, right? You suppressing the qualities. There are some kids who are more rebellious, there are some kids who are more stubborn, right? You keep on rewarding them, punishing them through some way or the other. You make a point कि बच्चे का वो rebelliousness खत्म हो जाए. अगर बच्चे का rebelliousness आप एक young age में खत्म कर रहे हैं, तो eventually वो बच्चा passive हो जाएगा. Eventually वो बच्चा जब कहीं काम करने जाएगा, तो he would be totally okay being exploited. Even if he's not totally okay being exploited, he wouldn't really have the thing in him that would make him rebel against the system. He wouldn't really have the thing in him that would make him stand up against the system. And you're doing all of this through this socialization process. Yeah. Citizens and consumers who uncritically accept the inequality that is generated by the organization of capitalist society. Zaretsky argues that a working class child's experience of socialization usually involves learning obedience, like I said, conformity, showing respect towards authority, right? If you are taught to be obedient, if you are taught to show conformity towards whatever is happening around you, if you're taught not to question authority, don't you think you would eventually be an ideal member of the workforce? You'd be an ideal member of the workforce because, everyone, the people who hire you tomorrow, they know that you've been trained at a very young age not to stand up against the system. And if anything, this makes the capitalist system even more stronger. And if the capitalist system is made stronger, it is eventually helping out the bourgeois. It is eventually benefiting the bourgeois, the rich, the elite. Moving on. Marxists therefore suggest that the family is partially responsible for the ideological control of working class and especially the suppression of ideas which might challenge the current organization of the capitalist system. Like I said, you suppress those ideas at a very young age. Taking it ahead, number two, Zaretsky is very critical of Parsons' stabilization of adult personality argument. Now, let me give you an example over here. If you all remember, when we were discussing Parsons, right? According to Parsons, the prominent American functionist, there are two basic and irreducible functions of a family. According to Parsons, there are two basic and irreducible functions of family. Basic is basic and irreducible is something that cannot be reduced any further. So according to Parsons, family आपको स्टेबलाइज करती है, फैमिली आपकी अडल्ट पर्सनालिटी को स्टेबलाइज करती है. फैमिली इज द प्लेस जहां पे यू फील सेफ एंड सिक्योर, यू गेट ऑल द इमोशनल सपोर्ट दैट इज usually not present in the outside world, right? That the outside world cannot offer you. However, according to Parsons, However, according to Zaretsky, who is criticizing Parsons, remember, Parsons, a prominent American functionalist, Zaretsky is a Marxist, and we've been discussing the Marxist perspective right now. Zaretsky is very critical of Parsons' stabilization of adult personality argument. In contrast, he argues that the role of the family is more sinister because its real function is to help workers manage the resentment of the capitalist workplace. Now, see, आप एक सिस्टम का हिस्सा हो, अगर आप एक जगह पे एक इदारे में एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में काम कर रहे हो जहां पे आपको पता है बहुत ज्यादा इनइक्वालिटी है, बहुत ज्यादा एक्सप्लॉइटेशन है, जहां पे आपसे एक्सपेक्ट किया जाता है, आपको ट्रेन किया जाता है कि जहां पे आप एक बहुत पैसिव रोल अदा करेंगे, राइट, जहां पे आप एक पैसिव रोल अदा कर रहे हैं, इन अदर वर्ड्स you're not standing up against them, right? Now, if you're not standing up against them, don't you think you need some way or the other to take it out? You would need some way or the other. You can't just keep on filling it in. I mean, there would be, even if you're filling it in, there would be a limit to it, right? You might come to a point where you might explode, right? Or is explosion se bachne ke liye, I repeat, is explosion se bachne ke liye, your family keeps a check on you, stabilizes you, right? पार्सन्स कहता है कि फैमिली स्टेबलाइज करती है आपको आपके बेनिफिट के लिए. मार्क्सिस्ट क्लेम करते हैं, एली ज़ारेत्स्की एक मार्क्सिस्ट है, वो क्लेम करता है कि फैमिली अगर आपको स्टेबलाइज कर रही है तो दिस स्टेबलाइजेशन इवेंचुअली बेनिफिट्स द कैपिटलिस्ट सिस्टम, इट इवेंचुअली बेनिफिट्स द रिच, द एलीट, राइट? नाउ, which generally oppresses and exploits them. Zaretsky notes that the nuclear family dampens such feelings because the workers who has a family is unlikely to engage in actions which threaten his income. Now, this is something that we have spoken about earlier as well, right? No worker would want his income to be affected, right? Like I had said at the very beginning, if you remember, what I had said was, you're a married man, a family man loses his bargaining power, right? He wouldn't want to stand up against the system because he does know if he stands up against the system, he might lose his income, he might be fired, he might lose his job. If he's losing his job, who is going to feed his family, right? Because of this constant fear, because of this constant threat, because of the fact that he cannot afford to let go of the monthly income, stable income, monthly, weekly, bi-weekly, any income that he's getting, he wouldn't want to risk that. And because a family man wouldn't want to risk that, he wouldn't do anything that the employers do not like. If your workers aren't doing anything that you wouldn't like, they're making you stronger. They're making your system more stable. They're ensuring that you keep on maximizing your profits. Moving on. Feeling because the worker who has a family is unlikely to engage in actions which threaten the income and therefore the family's standard of living. Research by Bainan found that the companies such as Ford, this is an amazing example, would only employ married men with families in 1980s because they were more reluctant than single men to take strike action. वो स्ट्राइक अगर आप कॉल कर भी रहे हैं वर्कर्स अपने लिए, तो वो स्ट्राइक का हिस्सा ही नहीं बनेंगे. अगर वो स्ट्राइक का हिस्सा बनेंगे, उनको पता है कि वो एम्प्लॉयर्स की नजर में खराब हो जाएंगे, जिसकी वजह से एम्प्लॉय शायद उन्हें निकाल दें, which they cannot afford. Yeah, feeling that the main responsibility was towards their wives and children rather than their co-workers or their fellow workers. Moving on. Similarly, Fran Ansley argued that capitalism has stripped male workers of dignity. Now, stripping male workers of dignity, what does that mean? When you talk about stripping male workers of their dignity, their power, the amount of control when you're working, right? When you're at your workplace, usually the idea that we bring in while explaining this is of alienation. A worker is made to feel alienated. अब वर्कर आपका alienated क्यों फील करता है, कैसे फील करता है, उस वर्कर की कोई से नहीं है, राइट? आप एक सिस्टम के लिए, आप एक कंपनी के लिए काम कर रहे हो, आप रिमोट कंट्रोल बना रहे हो, राइट? आप रिमोट कंट्रोल बना रहे हो, what sort of say do you have? You don't. You're producing pens, What sort of say do you have? You don't have any say. They ask you to produce red pens, you produce red pens. They ask you to produce blue pens, you start producing blue pens. They ask you to produce purple pens, you start producing purple pens. What say do you have? You're simply doing what the system requires you to do. It wouldn't be wrong saying that you're probably being treated as a cheap robot. You don't have any say over what you do, how you do it. But then again, do you realize these products, they are being manufactured, they're being made by the proletariats, by the poor. They're being made by the poor, yet owned by the rich, sold by the rich, and the profit is made by the rich again. If the profit is made by the rich, everything that we're talking about revolves around the rich. What say do you have there? You probably do not have any say, right? So according to Fran Ansley, she argued that capitalism has stripped male workers of dignity, power, and control at work. Surveys of factory workers suggest that many are bored by the tedious nature of their work. Many are alienated when you feel left out. Like I'll give you an example, meaning that they cannot identify with or bring themselves to care about the product they're producing. They feel powerless and consequently feel that their masculinity is being challenged. Now, we're talking about, like Ansley just said, we're talking about the male workers made to feel powerless. If they're made to feel powerless, don't you think deep down inside there's some sort of frustration that probably keeps on building in? If every single day there's this frustration that keeps on building in you, don't you think there's a possibility when you go back home, you take it out on your family? Since you cannot question the system is paying you money, and money is pretty important for you. This frustration that is being experienced by you, you're probably taking it every single day. This keeps on building it. You go back home and you take it out there. Who is to suffer then? It is the family who's to suffer, right? It's the family, because the family usually, we're talking about a patriarchal society. We're talking about patriarchal families, and they're the most common family forms, right? Your family, eventually your children, your wife, they're the ones who eventually have to suffer. Moving on. This male frustration and alienation is often absorbed by the family, and particularly the female partner. She argues that the powerless that man experience in the workplace leads to, the powerlessness that men experience in the workplace leads to problems such as domestic violence and child abuse, as men attempt to assert power, right? A man was stripped of his dignity at work. He felt like nothing was in his control. He feels like he wants to regain this control, and the safest place he feels he can regain that control from is probably his family. I'm not talking about what's right, what's wrong. This isn't, of course, right. But then again, that's the safest place for the man, because he wants somewhere or the other to be able to take out all this frustration. I hope I'm making sense. As men attempt to exert power, control, and authority at home, wives therefore act as a safety valves for capitalism, right? A safety valve for capitalism, right? Why a safety valve? See, अगर ये frustration घर जाके family पे नहीं निकलती, तो ये frustration बढ़ती जाएगी, और अगर ये frustration बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ गई, तो ये भी तो हो सकता है कि eventually a time would come that man might take out that frustration in the form of rebelliousness against the system. तो एक सेफ्टी वॉल्व की तरह सिस्टम तक उस फ्रस्ट्रेशन को आप जाने ही ना दें. सिस्टम तक जाने से पहले आप उस फ्रस्ट्रेशन को एक इजी आउटलेट देते हैं, and that easy outlet in that case is your family, right? In the form of domestic violence, sexual assaults, child abuse. Moving on. Safety valves of capitalism, because these men are not directing their anger at the real cause of the problems, that is the capitalist system, the nature and organization of capitalism. Number 3, some Marxists have claimed that the extended family was deliberately discouraged. Now see, जहां पे हम बात करते हैं एक्सटेंडेड फैमिलीज की। एक्सटेंडेड फैमिली होती क्या है? जब हम एक्सटेंडेड फैमिली की बात करते हैं तो ये एक्सटेंडेड फैमिली हैज टू डू with individuals beyond your typical nuclear family, right? Individuals beyond your typical nuclear family. Now, these individuals beyond your typical nuclear family, these type of families, rather these extended families, they were discouraged because you know what, जब हम इन तरह की जब हम extended families की बात करते हैं तो with extended families आपके पास ideas of communism आ सकते हैं, ideas of equality आ सकते हैं, and Marxists didn't, oh sorry, and the capitalist system did not at all want, the capitalist system did not at all want the poor, the powerless, the proletariats to get any sort of hint or idea about equality. They would not want the poor to have this option कि वो इकट्ठे एक इक्वल तरीके से रह सकते हैं, राइट? उनको ऐसा कोई मौका ही ना दो जिनसे उनको लगे कि कलेक्टिवली वो कुछ इकट्ठा मिलके वो कुछ कर सकते हैं, बिकॉज आज अगर वो इकट्ठा मिलके एक फैमिली में रह सकते हैं तो कल करा वो सारे इकट्ठे होके they could all get together, or as Karl Marx put said, a time would come when all these proletariats, they might stand up, unite against the capitalist system and bring in a revolution that would bring capitalism to an end and would bring in communism in a society. तो the safest way out is उनको आप ऐसा ऑप्शन ही ना दें कि वो कैपिटलिज्म के अलावा किसी और सिस्टम का सोच भी सके, right? Moving on, some Marxists have claimed that the extended family was deliberately discouraged by the capitalist class. This is because the mutual support system on which the extended family depends encourages socialist ideas such as collectivism, altruism. Altruism is being selfless, equality of opportunity, egalitarianism, or a system that is based on the concept of equality and selflessness, rather than capitalist values, which encourage competitiveness, individualism, greed, and selfishness, right? The fourth point out of the 4 points, so this is the last point put forward by Zaretsky, and these 4 points, what do they explain us? We're talking about how the nuclear family benefits the capitalist system, and this has been illustrated or exemplified through four different ideas. The fourth point, and this is a point we've discussed earlier as well, according to Ali Zaretsky, your families today, they're a unit of consumption instead of them being a unit of production. I repeat, according to Alice Zaretsky, these families today, they're a unit of consumption rather than a unit of production. अगर हम बात करते हैं agrarian society की, अगर हम बात करते हैं cottage industry की, आपकी फैमिली टुगेदर, आई थिंक आई रिटन समथिंग समवेयर दैट माइट हेल्प अस, या सी, अब देखें, अगर हम बात कर रहे हैं कॉटेज इंडस्ट्रीज की, अगर हम बात कर रहे हैं एग्रीरियन सोसाइटीज की, ओवर ईयर योर फैमिलीज वर यूनिट्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन, your families were units of production. अब units of production, in other words, your family used to manufacture things. पूरी family मिलके चीजें manufacture करती थी, produce करती थी, sell करती थी. आज आपके पास your family is no more a unit of production. Instead, today, because of this capitalist system, your families have become units of consumption, right? अब families आपकी units of कंजम्पशन क्यों है? आज हम प्रोड्यूस करने के बजाय ज्यादा चीजों को कंज्यूम कर रहे होते हैं, राइट? आज हमारे पास स्पेशलाइज एजेंसीज हैं, स्पेशलाइज इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं, राइट, जो अपनी सर्विसेज दे रहे होते हैं. पहले आप छोटे छोटे कामों के लिए घर में लोग नहीं बुलाते थे, सारे काम आप खुद करते थे. Look at how we as a family are a unit of consumption today. From the most basic necessities, इतनी ऐसी चीजें होती हैं, इतनी ऐसी DIY जॉब्स होती है जो हम खुद नहीं कर रहे होते. हम लोग खाना, मतलब फूड पैंडा ने आने के बाद तो फिर बची कुची जो एक चीज थी, खाना घर पे बनता था, वो भी आज you've seen how the family has started consuming from specialized agencies, specialized institutions. In this case, the example that I'm giving, different restaurants. So moving on, Zaretsky argued that the nuclear family is an essential component of capitalism because it is the major unit for the consumption of manufactured goods and services, and therefore is essential to the success and profitability of the capitalist system. This is one of the examples that I was discussing right at the beginning. आज आपकी फैमिली चीजें कंज्यूम कर रही है, और जहां आपकी फैमिली चीजें कंज्यूम कर रही है, आपकी कंजम्पशन पैटर्न से फायदा हो रहा है। किसका फायदा हो रहा है आपके कंजम्पशन पैटर्न से? आपके कंजम्पशन पैटर्न से फायदा हो रहा है बोर्जुआजीज का। उनका सिस्टम स्ट्रांग हो रहा है, उनकी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ज्यादा प्रॉफिटेबल है, right? You're actually helping them maximize their profits. So, moreover, the pursuit of consumerism may have the added bonus for the capitalist class of distracting workers from the unjust organization of capitalism. That's such a nice line. I like this. I like it whenever I teach this. You know what? According to Zaretsky at this point, I mean, this would further be supported by Herbert Marcuse. You might come across his name ahead. You know, today, you've literally kept the poor distracted. आज लोग इतना कंज्यूमरिस्ट कल्चर की वजह से फंसे हुए हैं. All you care about is, okay, I mean, let's not talk about your class. Let's not talk about you all, because alhamdulillah you all come from a privileged class. आप अपने workers, आप अपने काम वाले, आप अपने domestic staff की बात कर लें, आप अपने खानसामे के, आप अपने गार्ड की बात कर लें. You know, all they care about is, आज मैं अपना ये फोन चेंज कर दूं, आज मैं अपना वो फोन चेंज कर दूं. They can't. Do you know? I mean, I feel this. हम इतना फोन इतना नहीं अपना चेंज करते जितना हमारे पास जो डोमेस्टिक स्टाफ है वो फोन चेंज कर रहे होते हैं. I'm not saying they buy phones as expensive as yours, but then again, all they worry about is आज मैं ये ले लूं, आज मैं वो ले लूं. And because of this one, अच्छा, अब इस consumption pattern से फायदा क्या हो रहा है? इस consumption pattern से one, the more they consume, the more profits the bourgeoisies are making, the more profits the capitalist system is making. Number two, because of this falsely created needs, or rather say the wants that they all carry, because of this consumerist culture that they all carry, इस consumerist culture की वजह से आज वो अपने रियल मोटिव, क्योंकि कार्ल मार्क्स के हिसाब से इनका रियल मोटिव है रेवोल्यूशन लाना, आज वो अपने रियल मोटिव से डिस्ट्रैक्टेड है. Little do they care about how they're being exploited. All that matters for them today is how to buy this, how to buy that, how to consume this, how to consume that. So all of this together, if anything, according to the Marxist perspective, would distract these workers from the unjust organization of capitalism. For example, Marxists argue that the parents are encouraged to teach their children that the main route to happiness and status lies in consumerism and the acquisition of material possessions, right? The more you're consuming, the more you're acquiring things. You have one phone, you want another. You have this phone, you want another phone. I'm giving these examples of phones because this is more relatable to your generation. For example, Marxists argue that parents are encouraged to teach their children that the main route to happiness and status lies in consumerism and acquisition of material possessions. Consequently, the inequalities in wealth and income produced by capitalism often go unchallenged by a generation that is fixated on the acquisition of the latest designer labels and gadgets. Right? You fixated people. Give me a minute. I'll take your questions. Just give me a minute, right? You're talking about a generation that is fixated, that's almost obsessed with what to buy, how to buy, right? Little do they care about things that are happening around. Taking it ahead. Similarly, yeah, give me a minute. All right, just give me a minute, okay? Now, moving on, we're talking about Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse, he is a Marxist. From the Marxist perspective, he claims that, okay, now this is in line with the family being a unit of consumption. This is in line with how the family is made to feel like there are so many things that they need. ये false needs, according to Herbert Marcuse, create की जाती हैं. ये false needs create की जाती हैं, और इन false needs के पीछे मकसद ये है कि इन false needs से log, that is the proletariats, that is the individuals from the working class, they start wanting more. When they start wanting more, they would buy more, and if they buy more, even if they aren't yet able to buy it, they'd probably want to have it, which would want them to put in more of efforts supporting the capitalist system, working even a more what do you call it, working for a even more stricter routine. वो ज्यादा पैसे कमाना चाहेंगे, वो ज्यादा पैसे कमाएं ताकि वो इन फॉल्स नीड्स को खरीद सके, राइट? वो ज्यादा मेहनत से काम करते हैं तो भी बोर्जुआजी का फायदा, वो ज्यादा चीजें खरीदते हैं तो भी बोर्जुआजी का फायदा. अगर इन ज्यादा चीजों को खरीदने के चक्कर में उनके दिमाग में वो चीज पड़ी हुई कि नो, आई वांट टू वर्क हार्ड, आई वांट टू बाय दिस, 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 दैट वुड कीप देम डिस्ट्रैक्टेड फ्रॉम द रियल cause of their exploitation. And the real cause of their exploitation in this case is the capitalist system. Now, taking it ahead, similarly, neo-Marxist Herbert Marcuse noted that the profitability of capitalism depends on the family spending more on money on false needs. These are consumer goods which are mainly bought to be conspicuously. Now, we're talking about this conspicuous consumption, right? People talk about buying cellular phones. There are kids I see, they talk about, oh, I have iPhone 13 Pro Max, right? This is an example of conspicuous consumption. You're spending so that you can show off. I'm being very blunt. You're spending so that you can show off, right? Conspicuous in this case literally means something that is clearly visible. You're consuming things so that you could make others see what you're using. All of these products, they've become, they're more like a statement of about you, about your personality. You're probably not buying these items because you need them. You're buying them because you want others to see that you own them, right? To be conspicuously consumed, that is, their ownership is notified by this because they're trendy or high status items. However, the logic of capitalism dictates that these items quickly become obsolete, right? iPhone 12 was an amazing phone till the last year. It is clearly not the best today. It is iPhone 13 for the Apple users, iPhone 13 Pro Max, they say. Tomorrow there would be another phone, and this obsession that you carry today for iPhone 13 would eventually fade away, right? Become obsolete as they are replaced by improved technology or more fashionable items. Capitalist ideology transmitted by advertising and by mass media, by advertisements, by mass media, all of these false needs are created first, right? ये false needs को आप create करते हो ताकि ये आपके products को बेहतर तरीके से बेच सकें. And aimed at the family, ensures that family income continues to be spent on such items. This ensures that the capitalist class continues to make vast profits. Clear, dear? Now, this was about the Marxist perspective. I'd quickly want to evaluate the Marxist perspective, and then we'd end this class here. Now, when you talk about evaluating Marxist perspective or Marxist theories, in Strengths of Marxism, Marxist sociologists have questioned the notion that the nuclear family is always good for society. देखें, Marxist perspective से पहले हमने functionist perspective पढ़ा था, and functionists, especially if you talk about Parsons, they make family sound like it is the best institution. It always works towards benefiting the family members, benefiting the family as a whole. Today, the way we see it, not many people would agree to this especially after they've studied the Marxist perspective, right? Because there are so many things that Marxism has uncovered, which probably many people hadn't even thought of before. Possibility, they have drawn sociological attention to the possibility that powerful interests may be shaping family life. For example, there's little doubt that the nuclear family is deliberately targeted by advertisers as a unit of consumption. And the family is essential to the health of the capitalist system. Family hogi, family जिस तरीके से capitalist system चाहता है वैसे होगी, तो capitalist system को eventually benefit होगा इसका. Number two, however, Marxists such as Zaretsky tend to be over-deterministic. Now, this over-deterministic nature of Marxist theories, especially Zaretsky or Engels की हम बात करते हैं, over-deterministic का मतलब क्या है? Determinism क्या है? मतलब determinism is something that is bound to happen. For instance, I typically give an example. If I talk about the Spencer, right? If I let go of this is going to come down with the speed of 9.8 meters per second square. That's a determined thing. That's something that is bound to happen. So Marxist theories go interactionist because remember they're a micro theory. Right now, see kids, you all need to be very good at your basics, and all of these basics, they have already been taught to you. If you think you have any doubt on this, there are videos available. You might as well ask for them, you watch them, and that is going to clear out concepts. You need to know what Marxism exactly is for you to be able to look at how Marxists see family. You need to know what functionalism is. You need to know what functionalism is for you to be able to apply it to the role that functions think family has for the society. So is the case with interactionism. So when we talk about Zaretsky's view is probably an over-deterministic view of human behavior, and consequently they fail to take account of agency and free will. Determinism ka opposite free will. Determinism, for instance, deterministic ideas kya hai? Oh, this is bound to happen, right? Whereas free will ideas kya hai? Oh, this might happen, but then individuals, they have say. The individuals are not passive, they play an active role. They might do this or they might not do this. They might get affected by this or they might not get affected by this. जैसे ज़ेरेत्स्की साहब ने कहा कि पेरेंट्स अपने फैमिलीज को, अपने बच्चों को ये सारी चीजें सिखाते हैं, जरूरी तो नहीं है. कई ऐसे पेरेंट्स होते हैं जो अपने बच्चों को शुरू से सिखाते हैं, ओके लिसन, दिस इज नॉट समथिंग यू नीड, दिस इज समथिंग दैट द कैपिटलिस्ट सिस्टम benefits out of, and we might as well, I mean, there's a possibility, there's no harm looking at all the possible options that we have. So they fail to take account of agency and free will. Interactionists point out that Marxists rarely consider that some working class parents may actually resist ruling class ideology by teaching their children values and norms which are the product of working class culture. Therefore, empowering their children with knowledge of capitalist inequality and exploitation. If you're empowering your children at an early age and giving them knowledge about how this capitalist system is not benefiting everyone, you, अगर ये सब हो रहा है, अगर आप अपने बच्चों को एक यंग एज से बता देते हो, तो फिर तो आपका ज़ेरेत्स्की की जो पूरी थ्योरी थी उसको आप क्वेश्चन कर सकते हैं, right? Remember, we're evaluating the Marxist perspective on family right now. Another possibility is that working class parents may be well aware of the pitfalls of capitalism, such as inequalities in wealth, but feel that standard of living provided by capitalism is so comfortable that they're willing to dismiss inequality as a lesser evil. The possibility that the working class parents, they do realize this, that a working class family does realize it, but then again, despite of them realizing it, despite of them knowing for the fact that they're being exploited, they're okay with it because they're probably enjoying the facilities, the comforts of life that they drive out of capitalism. Moving on, Marxism also fails to consider how individuals interpret their family setup and its relationship to other institutions. Consequently, interactionists argue that Marxism may be guilty of ignoring the very real emotional and social satisfaction that people get from being members of a family. Now, the way Marxists made it feel like that family is taken as a safe haven, and that again benefits the capitalist system. But on the other hand, don't you think there would be so many people who might not agree to this? There would be so many people who might feel like the satisfaction, the love, the support, the emotions, the emotional support that they get from the family, it's real. It does not have any hidden benefits to the capitalist system. There's a possibility. The Marxist tendency to write off such satisfaction as the product of capitalist ideology is both too simplistic and patronizing. Summing it up, it's not as simple as it looks like. Feminism. Feminists make two very important criticisms of Marxism. First, they point out that the great weakness of Marxist theory is its economic reductionism. Now, Marxist शुरू से लेकर आखिर तक economic inequality से शुरू होते हैं, economic inequality पे खत्म होता है. जहां पे हम economic inequalities की बात करते हैं, तो ये economic inequality के अलावा भी तो इतने problems हैं. Talk about the darker side of family. Talk about there are so many other purposes that a family serves. There are so many other things that are happening within families. Why start off with economic inequality and ended up there? So we're referring to this as reductionism, a reductionist approach. You're reducing it to one little thing and making people believe, like making people feel like it is this that is causing a problem for everyone. There could be a lot beyond this as well. Marxists see women's experience in the family solely as a reflection of class experience and fail to consider that non-economic factors, this is important, non-economic factors, particularly patriarchy, misogyny, ethnicity, and religious beliefs can also shape women's experience of family life. I'm sure you wouldn't want to disagree to that. Second, feminists argue that this Marxist account of the family is very outdated and does not take into account of recent global economic and educational changes. Now, recently there have been so many changes that the societies have experienced, especially if you talk about this under the heading of liberal feminism. Liberal feminists do accept, they do agree to the fact that there have been certain changes that have been made in the political system. There have been so many social policies that are today. There have been so many things just that women today do have an opportunity. And things aren't as simple or as simplistic as the way traditional, typical Marxists are putting it like. So these recent global economic and educational changes have transformed women's experience of family life and the attitudes towards it. Women in many countries have acquired a great number of reproductive and legal rights, which mean that they, rather than their husband, choose when to have children or how many children they wish to have. Improved legal rights as well mean that they can now escape unhappy marriages. So this was the criticism that came from the feminist perspective. Prior to this, we spoke about the criticism that was put forward by the interactionist perspective. And this more or less explains, I think I'd want to show you all a question on this. And give me a bit, I'll just show you a question. So yeah, explain two ways the family supports ruling class interests according to Marxist theory, right? You could always use this question. I just send this file to you that would have this question as well. And explain one strength and one limitation of the Marxists. So I would like to send this entire set to you. You might as well would want to attempt this question, and show it to me. You could send an email, share this, taking you back to where we were. This is the question we have here. Give me a minute, child. So yeah, this is the question here. It's an 8 marker, and then there's this 6 marker. So yeah, that is it for the Marxist perspective on family.